Nick Standlea here, CEO of Test Prep Gurus and host of the Nick Standlea podcast. I earned a perfect score on the SAT when I was in graduate school as part of a study to show that SAT scores were not accurate indicators of raw intelligence. As a result of my involvement in that project, I started a company where our mission was to take test prep, raise scores as high as they could go so kids could reach their scoring potential, reach their dream colleges, while also maintaining their sanity and learning skills for college and beyond. Really excited to talk to you today. So let's get into it. Okay, let's talk about standardized testing. So we've got three different buckets that colleges fall into. One is going to be schools that are test blind. So those are schools that will not look at a test score, an SAT or an ACT, if you send them a score with your application. So test blind universities would include the Cal States in California and then the UCs in California. Our second bucket are schools that still require the SAT and the ACT. These schools are primarily located in Florida and Georgia, although we are seeing more schools reinstating their requirement for the SAT and the ACT. Recently, MIT has come back out and said that they require test scores, and Dartmouth has now said that going forward, they will require an SAT or an ACT for all applicants to their college. We do expect, now that Dartmouth and MIT have made this statement about the predictive value of tests, we're going to see more schools reinstate a requirement for SAT or ACT. But at this time, as you can see on the slide on your screen, 91.5% of schools fall into the third bucket, which is test optional. Now, test optional means you are not required to send in a score, but if you do send in a score, they will use that as another tool to evaluate your application. Now, one mistake I see students make today is that when they're applying to selective colleges, they make the assumption that if a school is test optional, they don't care about testing. But let's look at a little bit of data to see what colleges are actually doing with test scores when they receive them. So we've got a number of selective colleges up on the screen there: Amherst, Colgate, Yale, USC, Vanderbilt. You can read the rest for yourself. The gray bars indicate the admission percentage for students who apply to these colleges without a test score. The red bars indicate the admission percentage for students who apply with a test score. So for example, at Boston College, we see a 9% admission rate, 9 out of every 100 students that apply. So that's what an admission rate is. 9% of those students are admitted to Boston when they apply without a test score. Now, if we look at the red bar for Boston College, we see that over 27% of students are accepted when they apply to Boston College with a test score. And as you look at the information across the screen there, you'll notice that the red bars across the entire graph are higher than the gray bars. There is some variance from school to school, but the trend is very clear that students are admitted at a higher rate when they apply with a test score. Notre Dame would be another example in the middle of that graph. And we can see that students are admitted twice as often at Notre Dame when they apply with a test score. Something that's interesting that's not depicted on this graph is that in 2021, we saw smaller gaps between applying without a test score or with a test score at these same colleges. In 2022, those gaps got quite a bit bigger as colleges started to prioritize testing again. For the 2023 cycle, we've seen these gaps increase quite a bit. So while on this graph, it doesn't look like it's making a huge difference at USC, for instance, from the early application data on the 2023 cycle, we've actually seen a big bump from USC in admitting students that have an SAT or an ACT score. And judging by the new analysis that has come out of a study that included all of the Ivy League colleges, plus Stanford, plus Duke, plus Chicago, in which they found that standardized test scores had become the #1 predictor of grades in college, the #1 predictor of job placement after college, the number one predictor of graduation rates from all of those colleges, and the number one predictor of graduate school placement after college. So standardized tests have moved ahead of high school GPA as the top predictor for the four major metrics that colleges use to predict success. And as a result of this new information, which really has only recently begun to be covered by the media, and it's getting a lot more attention now that Dartmouth has really publicized that they made their decision to reinstate their requirement based on this data. They said, how could we not use a tool that is this predictive of success in college? We do expect these gaps to get much bigger and bigger with each successive admissions cycle. And we can see evidence of this by looking at what the admissions deans at these various colleges are saying. Yale was the first one to come out and say, hey, we've seen firsthand that standardized tests are now the number one predictor of grade point average all through college. MIT, shortly thereafter, came out and said, we've actually found that we're able to better serve kids that go to underperforming schools and who are underrepresented traditionally in college admissions when we reinstate the test score requirement. And MIT admitted their most diverse class ever this past year based on using test scores again. And a lot of this was down to kids that go to underperforming schools often don't have access to excellent counselors like you do at your school. They don't have access to information like this. They're not having testing seminars on their campus or webinars to that effect. And as a result, they don't know how much test scores can help in a test optional environment. And when these scores are reinstated at schools like Dartmouth and MIT, kids who want to attend them know that they're required, and then they submit a score that the data shows will make them successful when they get there. And that, of course, helps them in the college admissions process. Now, some of you are probably asking, why? Why has the predictive power of standardized test scores increased as we've moved into a test optional environment? It's a great question. The answer is grade inflation. Now, grade inflation has a negative connotation to it. Let's look at a couple of the facts, though. So in 1997, we had 39% of students who intend to apply to college graduating with an A average. So that means between 3.8 and 4.0 unweighted, you're not getting that extra point for APs and honors classes. In 2021, that shot all the way up to 55%, and we're now right around 60% of students who intend to go to college are graduating with an A average. Now, I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. Education has improved dramatically over the last 30 years. Kids that graduate from high school today are better educated and better prepared to succeed in college and beyond based on the education that they received in high school. So students getting more A's isn't necessarily a problem on that level. Where it becomes a problem is at all of these selective colleges, where they have more qualified applicants than they have seats available at their school for the incoming year. And college admissions officers want to conduct admissions in a fair and transparent way. They don't want it to feel opaque and subjective and this black box that you never really know what's going to work when you apply. And standardized test scores make this process more fair and transparent because it's an objective measure. Every student has to go into that testing room, take that test on their own. They know that they can't game the teacher a little bit to get a higher grade on the SAT and ACT like they can with a class. They know that they can't hire a private counselor in order to sometimes heavily edit or even write the essays for the student. Now, I'm not going to tell you that you can't raise your score dramatically through test prep, and that is a discrepancy in terms of equity across the board. But at the end of the day, that student still has to put in the hard work and show grit and perseverance in order to raise their score. And then they still have to go take that standardized test on their own. So what we've seen as we've run this test optional experiment is that standardized tests, while a very, very imperfect tool to measure how students are going to perform in college, is still a useful tool because of its predictive power, again, for grades, graduation rates, job placement, and graduate school placement. Let's talk about the UCs. Just to be clear there, the UCs and the Cal States are test blind. They do not accept an SAT or an ACT score when you apply there. In light of that, through 2025, they will not be using standardized test scores. What happens after that is anyone's guess, because it's very much a political issue at the UCs. And when things get political, it's hard to predict what's going to happen next. I will say the research team that is based up of faculty from all the UCs is continuing to push to bring back testing to the UCs because of the predictive power of these tests. And the faculty argues at the UCs, just like many other schools, having tests as an option would make the process more fair and transparent going forward. I will note for families who are really interested in specific UCs, take your AP classes very seriously. In the absence of an SAT and an ACT score at the UCs, they're putting extra added emphasis on your AP scores and your grades in your AP classes. So take those very, very seriously if you've got some UCs on your dream school list. And then for my 10th graders, do not underestimate the link between standardized test scores and scholarships. So just to use a few examples here, we saw multiple students apply to Texas Christian University, Chapman University, and Southern Methodist University. And in multiple cases, we saw very similar students admitted to all three of these schools. And I think they're great examples for that reason. So we had test optional students that did not use a test score get admitted to these schools. And then we saw kids with test scores get admitted to these schools. So you're saying, what's the difference? The students without test scores, even with a similar financial profile, similar grades, similar activities, those students had to pay full sticker price when they attended those colleges. Whereas the students with test scores received much more beneficial financial aid packages. A few examples of those: $112,000 at TCU, $144,000 at Chapman, and $91,000 at SMU. And when we're talking sums of this size, we're talking about graduating debt-free versus graduating with a ton of debt. And I'm a big proponent of students graduating debt-free. The cost of college has well exceeded the cost of inflation over the last 30 years, and these costs need to be reined in. Well, one way that families can combat this when we're staring at often looking at college bills that are $250,000 over 4 years is through scholarships. And one of the best returns on investment you're ever going to find is to put in that time and that energy into prepping for these tests, doing well, bringing your scores up, and then earning better financial aid packages. I would note the student who earned the $112,000 scholarship at TCU started with a 25 on the ACT. She put in some hard work. She got that score up to a 31, and that's how she got that scholarship. So even students who don't start out with a rocking ACT or SAT score shouldn't be discouraged by this, because something that's been true for 25 years and continues to be true to this day is you are in control of this part of the process. When it comes to standardized tests, I don't think they're great indicators of intelligence or capacity for the future, but I do think they are great measures for grit and perseverance. What that means is if you put in the energy and the hard work, your scores are going to go up. You're going to have more options for college and more access to these scholarships. So to sum up here, if you're only applying to the UCs and Cal States, you won't need tests. If you're going to apply to selective colleges in California or around the rest of the country, so within California, we might be talking about USC or Claremont McKenna College. Those colleges are test optional, and they do give a big boost to those students who submit an application with a test score. And then, of course, all those other colleges across the country, it's the same story. If you're interested in earning scholarships, we just covered that. Testing can play a big role. And then for anyone who wants to keep their options open as they move through this process, prepping and testing can be a very good idea. It's very fluid, and often what seems like your dream school can become a whole lot less than that, and a safety school that you weren't paying much attention to can rise right to the top of the list once you go visit it. And so keeping your options open is usually a very good idea as you move through this process. What is a good score? I'm a big proponent of this idea that there are no good or bad scores, because they don't mean anything without context. They're not telling us who you are as a person or your capacity for success in the future. What they are stepping stones to reach your goals. What do I mean by this? Let's take a look at this flyer here. And if you go to the website, www.prepgurus.com, that's prepgurus.com. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll have access to download this flyer. And what we've done is taken the 100 most applied to colleges and put the typical range for admitted students for SAT and ACT scores along with their admission rate. So for example, you can see Redlands on your screen there. Typically, students are admitted to that school when they apply with a score between a 23 and a 28 on the ACT. So if we had a student with a 25, they're going to be right in the middle of that range. That's going to help their application when they apply. But maybe this student is also interested in Pomona College, where the typically admitted student, that range goes from 31 to 34. Now that 25 isn't going to be very helpful. So if the student puts in some work to get a competitive score for Pomona, let's say they push their score up to a 32 or a 33, now they're going to be competitive at Pomona, but they're going to get a second benefit from that. If they also still apply to Redlands, now their score is above the range for the typically admitted student at Redlands. And that's when Redlands will be enticed to throw a really attractive financial aid package at that student in terms of scholarships in order to entice them to come to Redlands instead of a higher ranked school like Pomona or Claremont McKenna College. And again, you can download this flyer, take a look at it yourself from the Prep Gurus website. Okay, for students who took the PSAT as 10th graders, one thing you're going to want to take note of on your PSAT report is your selection index score. Now, I would note a couple of things about your PSAT report. Number one, the SAT is on a 1,600 point scale, but the PSAT is capped at 1,520 for 10th graders and 11th graders because they don't have the highest level difficulty questions on the PSAT. On your PSAT report, there is a second score, usually near the end, the selection index score. It's on a completely different scale. And this one goes up to 228. The reason it's on a different scale is they double weight the value of your verbal score for the National Merit Scholarship Competition. And then for the National Merit Scholarship Competition, it's all based on that selection index score. Here's why the selection index score is a big deal. So we've got 1.6 million students around the country that take the PSAT every year. Junior year, you're entered into the National Merit Scholarship Competition. So your sophomore score does not count for this competition, only the score you earned junior year. Of those 1.6 million students that take the PSAT annually, about 1% of them will become semifinalists in the National Merit Scholarship Competition. 8,000 of those students will go on to win the competition. Those 8,000 students receive a $2,500 scholarship. This is great. This is helpful. It will help pay for books while you're at college, but it doesn't necessarily really move the needle in terms of scholarships. People are interested in the National Merit Scholarship Competition really to hit the semifinalist level or above. And the reason why is there's a huge pool of money from individual colleges when you hit semifinalist level or higher. For instance, when you are admitted to Boston College, if you were a National Merit semifinalist or a National Merit Scholarship Competition winner, they will automatically award you a $100,000 scholarship to attend Boston College. Now, the cutoff for this current year in California, we will believe will be 221 for our current juniors. So if you're a sophomore and you see your score, your selection index score is close to that 221, it's probably going to make sense to do some prep for the PSAT leading into your junior year PSAT. For juniors, if you get close to that cutoff but didn't quite make it, it's okay. You're still going to have access to these same scholarships. You'll just have to get there through the SAT or the ACT in their official capacity. Okay, let's talk about timelines. For my 10th graders, I hope that all of you take the PSAT during your 10th grade year. If you haven't and it's already passed, you can hit us up through the website and you can take a mock SAT or a mock PSAT in its place just to see where you would be scoring if you took it today. The second step you're going to want to do, ideally pretty close in time to that PSAT you took in 10th grade, is take a mock ACT. And you can also take a mock ACT through the Prep Gurus website. You've got the link there on your screen. Again, it's www.prepgurus.com. It'll also work if you go to testprepgurus.com. They both go to the same website. Up in the right-hand corner, you're going to see a big red button for take a free mock test. Click that, fill it out, and we can set you up with whatever practice test you need. And we do not charge for this service. We're all teachers here. We want to help as many students as we can. And this is a way that we can help a whole lot of students for free. Of course, we do charge something for our one-on-one preparation for these exams. But as far as the mock testing goes, I encourage you to take advantage of that free service just to get more information and make good choices as you move through this process. So somewhere in 10th grade, we want to have that PSAT done and a mock ACT. In the summer between sophomore year and junior year, that's when you want to start to put together a testing plan. It doesn't mean that you need to start prepping right away, right then. That would depend on your current scores. But you want to put a plan in place. Parents and kids sit down together, check it out with your counselor, talk to somebody on our staff, get all the information you need, and then pick out some test dates for junior year and just before senior year begins, so you've at least got them plotted on the calendar. It's going to vary from student to student when they take their official exams. Students that are on a more accelerated path that have naturally higher scores, they might take their first official exam in the fall of their junior year. For most students, what's going to be developmentally appropriate would be to take their first official test in spring of their junior year. You're then going to want to plot out 2 more test dates after that first official one. You might not even need to take it a 3rd time, but we find it's a very good idea to just have it plotted on the calendar, just so all students know if something goes wrong on the first time or the second time they take it, they've got the 3rd one to fall back on. A couple of other notes on this. We do have score choice. So that means that any score that you don't like, that you don't want anyone to see, they never have to see it. We've also got something going now, which has really taken off in this test optional environment, which is super scoring. And I'll give you an example of that. So super scoring is where a college will cherry pick the best of 2 different test dates and combine them into one score. So for instance, if this was a student taking the SAT and they scored a 500 on the verbal and a 700 on the math, they have a total score of 1,200. If they take it a second time and they score a 700 on the verbal and a 500 on the math, so the scores are reversed this time, they still have a total score of 1,200. But if that student sends both of those scores to the colleges that they're applying to, the vast majority of schools will take the 700 from the first test and the 700 from the second test and actually compute their score as a 1,400 when they're evaluating your application. So super scoring can lead to big advantages in this process for those families that know about that trick. Okay, and for anyone who wants to get in contact with us, a lot of information up on the screen there on how to do that, different ways that we work with students and help students through this process. That QR code on the screen, you can actually scan that with your phone if you're watching this on a desktop, and a screen will come up to enter in some information. If you'd like to get on our free newsletter where we just give tips for the college admissions process, keep everybody up to date based on the latest trends and the latest things that are happening in college admissions and help educate families as they move through this process. You can also get there through the website, www.prepgurus.com/updates. Anyone that wants a free mock test, same website, click the big red button, fill in your information. We'll set you up with a mock test. We've also got an Instagram account, which we found is a great way to help push out information as things happen. So as other schools reinstate their testing requirements or change them in any way, we can let people know about that. And then, of course, we've got the podcast, which can also be found on our website or on any podcast platform that you listen to. We're bringing on a lot of different college admissions experts. We've got some great episodes coming up in the next couple of months. We also interview a lot of high achievers and interesting people. We just had a best-selling author from UC Irvine on. That episode's going to come out shortly with Donald Hoffman. So I encourage everybody to check all of that out if you're interested. And thank you so much for your time and energy today. It's always a pleasure to talk to all of you. And if we can help in any way, just let us know.